Well, welcome to night number 2 of VBS. I'm Wayne Williams, and I'm your host for tonight, I guess. Those of you who are here tonight, welcome. Those of you who came back from last night, I'm surprised, but welcome, and thank you. Tonight we're going to look at the calling, the saving, the whole process with Paul. And what does that mean, and what does that look like? In order to do that, I need to use an illustration, since I think that will help you. And my illustration is a baseball bat. Now, back in the day, when I was young and we would play sandlot baseball, we'd take a bat, and the two best players would throw the bat up, and then they would move, and what they wanted to do is be able to get the knob of the bat so that they had first choice. So you always wanted to be, chosen. It was always great if you were the captain, but, when you're little, you're kind of like the runt. You don't get chosen for too much. And that reminds me of Paul. Paul was the last apostle chosen by Christ. But does that make him an inferior apostle for Christ? It's been an interesting question. And in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes this series of the adventures of Paul and what his life was like for Christ. So I've got it here, 2 Corinthians chapter 11. I'm going to read it to you, beginning in verse 22. Are they Hebrew? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I speak as if insane. I'm more so. In far more labors, in far more imprisonments, beaten times without number, often in danger of death. 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 40 was the number calculated to kill you, so he was just short of death each one of those times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I've spent in the deep. I've been on frequent journeys and dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brethren. I've been in labor and hardship, through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. So he goes on, and you start listening to those things, and you say, wow, Paul's really got a great testimony. And it sounds like it. I wish I had a good, strong testimony. And Paul's going through this list of things that make him sound great. And if you're going through the list of things that makes you sound great, is what you want to do is end on the high note, the thing that makes you more special than anybody else. So here comes Paul. And he concludes this in verse 32 and 33. In Damascus, the ethnarch under Aretas, the king, was guarding the city of Damascus in order to seize me. And I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall, and so escaped his hands. Now, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, wow, all those other things Paul could say, I did on my own. But that brings me to my second little thing. It's a rope. Years ago, there was a daily devotion in one of the devotionals, and it said somebody made a good rope. And it was talking about the rope that let Paul down the side in the Damascus wall, which was about 60 feet. So it's recorded in the book of Acts what happened, but Paul recounts it here in Corinthians. And so I have a question for you. If you can look in Acts and Corinthians and tell me, who were the men holding the rope? Simple answer is we don't know. Their names aren't listed. Well, how long did they hold the rope? They held the rope until the job was completed. When did they hold the rope? Well, at night, in the greatest time of need for Paul. We know where they held the rope. So, who did they hold the rope for? And we can all say, well, the Apostle Paul. Yeah, but you know what? At that time, he was just a new Christian. He wasn't the Apostle Paul. He hadn't been this man. He was just a passionate man who had been saved by Christ. And you think his Damascus Road experience would be his calling card, the thing that he wanted to be remembered for. Paul says no. He was being let down in a basket by a rope by people we don't know. And I want to use that and then talk a little bit about Peter. Peter's not in these lessons, but I think it's important to understand, and I mentioned it in our last session. In John chapter 21, Peter has denied Jesus 3 times. He says, I'm going to go back to my old way of living. And he goes out, and they say, it's Jesus on the shore. Paul jumps out of the boat and goes there, and there's Jesus cooking fish on a charcoal fire. The only other time charcoal fire is mentioned is when Peter was standing there by a charcoal fire denying Christ. So Jesus recreates this whole scenario. And he asks Peter 3 questions. He says, Peter, or Simon, do you love me with God's kind of love? Basically, the way I love you. And Simon replied, well, I love you like a brother. So Jesus asked him a second time, Simon, do you love me with God's love, the way that I love you? And Simon said, I love you like a brother. And then Jesus looks at him and says, Simon, do you even love me like a brother? And that devastated Peter. But that is the instance when Simon completed his journey from Simon to Peter. Then he became the leader, the great apostle that we know him as. But it took a breakfast by the seaside to make that happen. Well, last night we looked at Matthew. And you know, you don't have any of the dramatic stuff like you do with Peter or you do with Paul. You have a simple Matthew, follow me. And you see his inclusion into the family was the only motivation he needed to go on. Some of us, like Paul, and some of us, like Peter, we have to have a humbling experience to get our attention. You would have thought his salvation would have done it, but the thing that put him over was being let down a window in a rope basket. So, the questions we normally ask, and as you're thinking about this, how many of you have ever been rope holders? We all should say, well, I have been. Well, when did you hold the rope? Anytime you've taught a class, you've worked with VBS, and you've ministered to these kids, you become a rope holder for them. How long do you hold the rope? Well, how long do you have an association with them? When do you hold the rope? You hold the rope as long as they need you to hold the rope. How do you hold the rope? Well, the answer to that question is you just need to know how to hold the rope. It's not anything special about the rope. It's just the fact that you're willing to hold it for somebody else. I hope that you don't have to have an experience like Simon Peter did. I hope you don't have to have the experience like Paul did. But after Paul was let down in the basket, Jesus put him on the back burner for 8 years. He was in Tarsus. And if you read his writings, it's what I get is for 8 years, he was going back and looking at all the rules and regulations of Judaism. And then he was answering those questions with the word grace. Grace is the active function of love. And it took Paul maybe quite a few years to fully grasp the intent of the love of God and the grace of God. That understanding didn't begin on the Damascus Road. It began with a group of guys holding a rope to let him down the basket so he could run away as fast as he could go. As we go on through this time, maybe there's somebody that you need to be holding a rope for. And you get so frustrated, you just say, I don't want to do it anymore. Is the job done? Are you complete? Are they ready to go on their own? I can't answer those questions for you. But I know we're all called to be rope holders. All we have to do is know how to hold the rope. It doesn't matter who's in the basket. It may be the next Billy Graham. You don't know. Just hold the rope. I hope you all have a good night, a good VBS time. And for those of you who are able, I'll see you again tomorrow night. God bless.